Starting from my extreme left, we have Dr. Ranganathan, who is one of the best polemicists, and I think the most absolutely crystal clear adherents of a point of view that hasn't been expressed in the manner in which he expresses it, not only on national TV, but now in a best-selling book, which has shattered a large number of records. We have with us Smita Prakash, who has been one of the longest-standing journalists amongst us. She has looked at pretty much everything over the last 35 years. I'm not dating you. You still look very young, but the point is, and very glamorous, so I'm not dating you at all. But the facts are the facts, aren't they? The hard facts. Pawan Verma, who has been in government, he is also somebody who is, I feel, the most articulate voice, the most reasonable voice, and clearly someone who has gone into unraveling the great mysteries, and of course, mysteries only because they were never revealed, of our great Hindu civilization, and he will tell us why that was the case. We have with us Mr. Jay Panda, who is the National Vice President of the Bharatiya Janata Party, so he will give you an insider's perspective. And of course, Mr. Ram Madhav, a towering intellectual in his own right, someone associated with the Sangh, also within the BJP scheme of things, and of course now runs one of India's most influential think tanks. So without further ado, let's get on with the conversation. Mr. Ram Madhav, let me begin with you first. What is the Sangh's idea of India? Now, we've devoted a chapter to this. A lot of people will want to know, is it exclusivist? Is it oriented towards the creation of a religious state, a Hindu Rajya, more so than a Hindu Rashtra? And should those who value secularism feel threatened by its long-term intellectual project?
Thank you, Rahul. And at the outset, let me congratulate you for coming out with this book. And I wish you a great success. Should become a bestseller if it has not become already one. In the Sangha, we believe that this nation is a Hindu Rashtra, or is the Hindu Rashtra, in a very cultural and civilizational sense, not in any religious sense. And I must tell you, majority of the people from minority communities have no issue with this understanding, you must remember. Because that brings me to that other point, that whether that idea of Hindu Rashtra is exclusive or anti any particular group of people, I would say, if it is exclusive, it cannot be Hindu Rashtra. If it is exclusive or if it is against anybody, it cannot be Hindu Rashtra, because as I said, as a civilization, as a culture, we have been the most inclusive, most Catholic, it's the most Catholic set of ideas, most Catholic inclusive set of ideas. That is what we call as, in RSS we call as Hindu, somebody may call it Indian, somebody may call it Bharatiya, you may use any name. But essentially when you talk about the civilizational, cultural identity of this country, which dates back by several millennia, it is inclusive, it cannot be exclusive. If it is exclusive, it cannot be Hindu. That's the understanding of RSS.
Mr. Jay Panda, does the BJP plan to overhaul the constitution? It's a question that comes your way, I'm sure. Is it fundamentally militated against pluralism? If not, how do you respond to those who say that your political impulses are communal?
I would urge anybody that has doubts on these questions to actually pull out and read the BJP's own constitution. It mirrors the Republic, and it is an extension of what my friend Ram Madhav ji just explained about our belief system. It is certainly not exclusivist in the sense that it wants to keep anybody out. It certainly believes that all Indians have the same rights, irrespective of their religion or caste or any other grouping. Does the BJP want to amend the constitution? You know, the Constitution itself very specifically spells out certain pending items that are desirable, that need to be done, but because of the great turmoil and violence at the time of partition, they were kept on hold for a temporary period. Uniform Civil Code, for instance. Now, how can you have, in the 21st century, the largest democracy that humankind has ever seen, where all citizens are guaranteed equal rights by the Constitution, but they do not in fact enjoy equal rights under civil law? Are we entitled to change the Constitution? Yes, but it is specifically defined how we're going to do it. It's not going to be through tanks rolling down the streets. It hasn't happened in 9 years because we still need to build that consensus, get the votes in both houses. Our stand has been very clear over the many decades. And remember how some of our opponents used to ridicule them? Even those who actually agreed with us in principle used to ridicule them as not being doable, not being practical. 370 being one example. But we have stood by our commitments, written, verbal, made to the people of India over the decades. Do we want UCC? I certainly do want UCC. I mean, anybody who is rational, sane, thinking Indian who believes in the Constitution, who believes in democracy, ought to believe in UCC. So, will we change the Constitution? I believe we should. I believe we can and will, in a manner that is completely legal, in a manner that is completely transparent, in a manner which is not, it's not done by subterfuge. We have campaigned on these principles, and if we get the people's mandate to the extent that we need to make these changes, I believe we should.
That's, I think, a very bold enunciation. But because he has emphasized that it will be along principle lines, I think it is something that we should all look at closely, because constitutions are, of course, living and breathing documents. So there is no harm if someone wants to evolve it into something else. Ms. Prakash, you have interacted closely with both the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, and they have clearly evolved a framework of governance to serve all Indians equally. Why then does the media constantly accuse them of fascism? Second, as a long-standing distinguished journalist, do you see the fault lines of caste, north-south, linguistic in the polity deepening as we go ahead?
How many times are you going to call me long-standing? He's really aging me out there.
Upstanding, outstanding, and outstanding.
No, I'm just kidding. But you know, when Siddharth mentioned about me reading book cover to cover, when I asked Rahul who's going to be there in the panel, and then I got to know about this. I'm the only non-author, by the way, out here. So I was like, it just reminded me of this, you know, the 10th board exam. We have a young kid out here. You remember how we had to mark everything and learn everything, memorize everything? Because I always have that panic, especially when I'm in the same panel with Pawanji. Years ago, now again I'm dating myself, 32 years ago, if I can be precise, when Pawanji was a young bureaucrat, he was just a joint secretary then. I worked on a documentary for Ministry of External Affairs on Jawaharlal Nehru. And of course, I was petrified. I had just started working on documentaries. And you know how it is, Siddharth, researching on that, where you have such a large volume of work, so much that Nehruji's written himself, so much written by Nehru, so much of criticism about Nehru too. So, you know, when you research on these, and then you have Pawanji, who's going to be looking at every single line and voicing the documentary too. So it was great fun, great experience. And then the next documentary I worked on was Middle Class India. And Pawanji's written a book on that. So there's a lot of, you know, history out here. But coming back to your book and about your question on Prime Minister and the Home Minister, many of the things that you've written in the book I've lived through that experience, right? When you were talking, when you write about the Babri Masjid issue. So when I read and I return back to the books. So when you've researched so meticulously on this, on what happened, and then on Kashmir, when you talk about Bangladesh in your book, and then there are certain things which riled me up when you talk about Hindu Pakistan or Hindu Bangladesh. These are things which we have heard so much. We've discussed it in various bulletins which you have done, which I have been one of the people taking part in those debates, Anand too. But we speak in that 20-second, 30, and he speaks in the 30-second. So we've discussed all this. And for those who don't know, Rahul and I shared office space when we were working, again,
Yeah.
25 years ago, maybe.
That's a secret.
Again, that's a secret.
We were not going to let that cat out of the bag.
Yeah. So, deadlines, things like that we have worked on. And in those days, we didn't have access to going into the Prime Minister's office and interviewing him. I did interview at that stage. I had Prime Minister Gujral. I covered that overnight, when he became Prime Minister under those really absurd circumstances, actually. I mean, nobody thought it would be him. And it was a very interesting experience. And by 2 a.m., I was exhausted, and I just went to him and I said, is it you or isn't it you? Because all bulletins are over by now. And I'm still chasing you because I was at that time reporting for Foreign Network, so I had to be there, Reuters and the others. So, but that was the first time that I interviewed a Prime Minister to be. And then subsequently later, when it comes to Prime Minister Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah, you've interviewed them, you've met with them so often. Nobody believes us when we tell people that they don't ask questions in advance, that both of them are so articulate that they can speak on any subject. What does happen is that when you interview a Prime Minister, being misquoted is something that a Prime Minister cannot afford. It can't happen. It's very wrong if somebody misquotes a Prime Minister, and that's happened in the past. There was a time when Prime Ministers used to be interviewed by foreign networks, and there was no cameraman of the Indian Prime Minister present. So the Prime Minister was dependent on that foreign news network or the Indian network to interview and then edit that part. So there were those sequences where there were times when the answer was long, but because the slot was small, they would edit that. And when they edited it, sometimes the essence was gone. And you'd see that happening. I won't name the Prime Minister, but it happened, well, I might as well, till Narasimha Rao's time.
Right.
Till Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, there was never even the Films Division documentary guy who was there present in the room documenting a Prime Minister. That subsequently changed after that, and they started having a cameraman present and interview, just for record's sake. But both of them, I can be, in fact, with Mr. Amit Shah, he's so sharp, when you can make a mistake and he corrects you, and then he says, if you want, baad mein edit kar lena, aapne galti ki thi. So it's very interesting. He picks on these. And Prime Minister Modi, even as Chief Minister of Gujarat, absolute pleasure to interview him. As far as earlier Prime Ministers are concerned, with Prime Minister Vajpayee, I didn't interview him, but press conferences of his, when we would ask a question and then he would speak, and then later we were told by Mr. Brijesh Mishra what he meant was this, because he had this way of speaking in colloquial Hindi, which could get misquoted. So each Prime Minister has been a pleasure to interact with, interview. Maybe someday I will write a book.
Hasn't someone already written something on all the Prime Ministers and
There
how
have
they
been
decide?
several books. There have been several books on Modi and India, but then yours is special.
Dr. Ranganathan, I don't know where to begin, because we've shared some brilliant encounters on air, and I've always had the privilege of speaking to you when you're at your best. But I'm asking you a couple of questions now, because it's important to tell the audience this. Now, there is so much talk about how Hindus of a particular stripe discriminate against others. But you've written a whole thesis, and my word, it is something, where you actually argue the contrary. You believe that they've been discriminated against in a secular state. How does that happen? How does that happen?
First of all, thank you very much, Rahul. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be sitting amongst so many luminaries with half a century of journalism experience right next to me. Combined century of political experience next to, no. But it's absolutely wonderful. And it was wonderful of Rahul to have thanked Lindy. And of course, behind every successful man is a woman. But in this case, it's also a woman and a child as well. So Leela,
True.
in fact, when you talk of the real editor at home, having known the Shiv
Editor
Shankars, it's actually not Lindy, but Leela who's the real editor. So thank you to the three of you. It's absolutely wonderful. I have thoroughly enjoyed this book, Rahul, and it's triggered so many questions in my mind, and it's kept me thinking. So I just like to elucidate just 2 or 3 of those, if I may, before Pavanji speaks. I think the first one is, reading this book, I've realized that I don't want to take the name of Ambani or Adani, but there really is, it's a battle between Neeta and Tina. Tina is, there is no alternative, and Neeta is, Narendra is the alternative. So, I think the country has already decided, let's be very honest about it. People like to say that these state elections were semi-finals and things of that sort, but you know, you don't decide the finals before the semi-finals. But in this case, I think people have decided, because I think the country is progressing very well. But you know, I think India would stop evolving and progressing if we were to be satisfied with the pace. And I think this book lays out in a beautiful fashion, and both Siddharth and you, Rahul, have to be thanked in this, because it triggers a lot of questions that quite frankly hadn't appeared in my mind before. And one is that, and you did hint at what I have written about, you know, the thing that, no, to be very honest, this government in the last 10 years hasn't really done anything for the Hindus. Let's be very honest about it. The optics are brilliant. Modi ji goes to Kashi, he takes a dip in the Ganges, he wears that, you know, vibhuti, and there are bhajans and Ram temple and everything. But I can't think of a single thing that this government has done that others really haven't thought of doing, you know, for the Hindu cause. And I have written a book. This is not about my book, but you know, that book elucidates 8 causes that a Hindutva government should have worked upon, and it just hasn't. You know, let's talk about Places of Worship Act, that it should have abrogated on day 1. Waqf Act, it should have abrogated. You know, rehabilitation of Kashmiri Hindus. You talk about, you know, all the things about eulogizing barbarians who've murdered and pillaged Hindus. So, RTE provisions, so many others. Control of Hindu temples being the biggest one. But away from that, it is also a fact that Mr. Modi is blessed with the kind of opposition that he has. You know, sometimes you left wondering whether it is leader of opposition or opposition of leader. But, and the reason for that is that all the decisions that Mr. Modi has taken in national interests or national decisions, the opposition opposes blindly. And there are so many, Rafale, Balakot airstrike, you have the Swachh Bharat, you have Ayushman scheme, you have 370 abrogation, you have CAA. All of them have been opposed, outraged upon. And all the decisions that Narendra Modi has taken that are anti-national, the opposition supports. So, whereas it should be doing exactly the opposite. And the biggest that comes to mind is the repeal of the farm laws. You know, they have single-handedly taken us back 10 to 15 years, where we could have been catapulted to a middle-income economy. And the opposition supported the repeal of the farm laws. Whereas those 3 farm laws almost verbatim were in the manifestos of not only Congress party but many other parties. When Modi brought it on, they started calling them black laws. There are so many others. I mean, on corruption, I can go on privatization. When Mr. Modi said government has no business to be in business, and all this government has done in the last 10 years is to be in the business of being businesses. But the opposition supports, Mr. Modi not privatizing anything. In fact, it wanted to oppose even the privatization of Air India, but somehow it couldn't because it happened. I don't know, we are progressing, there is no doubt about it, but the pace at which we are progressing leaves a lot to be desired. And I think what I loved about this book, Rahul, was that it triggers exactly this sort of questioning that every voter must think, it's not that the UPA did not do well. Of course, there were a lot of things that were wrong. It's just that Mr. Modi has done better than the UPA. There is no question about it. But what is the pace? That is what this book triggers that question.
Mr. Verma, thank you for your graciousness. You've written a celebrated book on the Hindu civilization. I think if people haven't read it, they must immediately go and pick up a copy. Why was it obscured? Why was the Hindu civilization obscured from view for so long over these 7 decades? And who was complicit in obscuring it? And what was the agenda?
Thank you, Rahul. I chose to speak last because, of course, there were better spokespersons and spokespersons that led me. I think any comment on your book must essentially deal with its central thesis. We are talking of individuals, of recent events, of politics, of governments changing, and so on and so forth. But the real thesis of the book is, in a way, about the reclamation of India's civilizational culture. It is something that is very common with colonized countries. The aim of the colonizer is not to physically subjugate you. The aim of the colonizer is to colonize your mind. And in that process, while you may obtain political freedom, the cultural impact of colonialism continues for decades after that. And therefore, I think in my discussions with Rahul and when I read the book, the essential intellectual thesis of the book is that now there is a genuine attempt at reclaiming that culture. And I think that is important because for too long, as I write in my own book, any reference to the refinements, antiquity, continuity, assimilation, diversity of our ancient past was tantamount in some manner, as interpreted by some people, to be anti-secular. If you spoke about the greatness, for instance, of the Upanishads, or you start speaking about the Brahma Sutras, one of the most remarkable documents, in the anglicized elite world of Latvians or its similar counterparts, it was tantamount to your having become a Sanghi. I don't believe for a modern nation, but an ancient civilization, this neglect of the legitimate achievements of our past is sustainable. Which is why I remember in school, even in university, we were taught very little about the greatness of 3,000 years of our past, if not more on which the foundations of this civilization were built, not unalterably, not written in stone, but which evolved and which have left to the young nation. So I think that's the important point you make in this book. Having said that, my own view is that much more needs to have been done if that indeed is the goal. As you are aware, if you see the statistics of the budget allocated to the Ministry of Culture, it has been successively cut. And so much more can be done about enlightened ways of integrating with the educational curriculum the three foundational texts of Hinduism, which are the Upanishads, the great Upanishads, the mother of all Hindu philosophy, the Brahma Sutras, remarkable, and the Bhagavad Gita, for its essential messages. More can be done. My last point as an opening statement is that in this process, I don't believe we further the rediscovery of our ancient past by trying to emulate why other religions perhaps did not have the kind of Sanatan, Anadi or eternal tag that is attached to Hinduism. Hinduism is distinguished by its conquering eclecticism. As Ram Madhav ji said, its essential nature is inclusive. Ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti. Ano bhadraha kritavo yantu vishvata. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. If you enter parliament as I did when I first joined it, what you see first is Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. For the big-hearted, the entire world is your family. And please remember, these lines were articulated 5,000 years ago when the reaction of most emerging communities was exactly the opposite. So it obviously shows a certain inclusivity and breadth of canvas which, in perpetuating it by our current context, should not be negated. If that is important, then I do believe that the rediscovery of Hinduism should be conflated with the inclusivity that itself guarantees. After all, the Charvaks, which are part of Hinduism, said the Vedas are a bunch of lies. They are part of Hinduism. Tantric practice is unorthodox, not part of mainstream Hinduism, it is part of Hinduism. So therefore, I think, and in your concluding chapter, Rahul, you point to some of those possible dangers, which is that perhaps in the pursuit of a greater discovery of our Hindu past and our civilization, we don't allow overzealous people to carry it to a point where it negates the very principles on which Hinduism has survived, flourished, and indeed become an exemplary religion in the world. And by that I mean that India is a plural, multi-religious, multicultural country. This is not a matter of theory. As Jawaharlal Nehru wrote in 1948, the nature of things are such that coexistence is not an option but a compulsion. We have people of different faiths. Even the Christian minority in India, which is less than 2%, is more than the combined population of Hungary and Greece. And now we have 200 million Muslims. Yes, there were excesses in the past, minority appeasement included, and a certain insensitivity to Hindu causes, which I have outlined in some detail in my book, In the Great Hindu Civilization, which need correction. Like, for instance, the temple, control of temples issue. But if the pendulum swings to the other side, we will not only be negating the principles of Hinduism, but actually eroding the foundations of this republic, and that is something we should always bear in mind.
This particular book was the lens that the current RSS, Mr. Ram Madhav, is going in stressing that there should be no supremacism. So there should be no supremacism when it comes to doctrinal faiths, and there should be, of course, no supremacism when it comes to the Hindu faith. Now, you're seeing a shift in the RSS position on this. Is it a shift really, as people are suggesting, or was it always part of that tradition, but it was somehow obscured or misrepresented for political reasons?
The core belief for the RSS has always been the same right from its inception. For that matter, I think most of you know, but let me also reiterate this point, that RSS has not propounded its own ideology ever. You know, the most remembered chief of the RSS, the second chief, Guruji Golwalkar, he was asked, what is the literature that explains the ideology of the RSS? Do you have anything? He said, yeah, we have so many things. Then he was asked to name, and he named that, you know, we have Vedas, we have Upanishads, we have Ramayana, we have Mahabharata, we have Shastras, we have scriptures, right from Veda Vyasa to, as he mentioned, Charvaka. So my point is, we have not created any new ideology. Hence, we are not propounding something in 1930s and 40s and changing it today. That question doesn't arise. RSS has evolved with the evolution of this civilizational cultural idea of our country, namely Bharat, or India, we want to call it. So, Sangh has always maintained this position that when we talk about Hindus of this country, or for that matter, Hindu Rashtra, as I said in the beginning, we are talking about it in a very cultural, civilizational sense, the whole country, the entire population, for one very important reason, that those who are, you know, constitutionally, legally not defined as Hindus in our country, sometimes categorized as minorities. If you trace their ancestry, they all came from the same civilizational or cultural background, from this same milieu. They have not come like in Europe. They have not come from any other country, Northern Africa or Middle East. They have not migrated from anywhere. They are all part and parcel of this great country, great culture. When you talk about 5,000 years of civilization, every person of this country, I would say 99.99% of the people of this country are a part of that great civilizational history of this country, or tradition of this country. That is why I say, this whole debate that if you say Hindu, you are anti-minority, is a kind of a very perverted debate that began around the time that people like Jawaharlal Nehru started propounding this idea. But this was never like that. The civilizational cultural identity of this country has been very well appreciated by everybody. Ustad Bismillah Khan, until his last days, used to sit in Kashi Vishwanath Mandir and play Shahna every day. He never saw it as a Hindu-Muslim issue. It's a rich tradition, culture that he was basically, encouraging or just simply following. Same has been the case with every Hindu in this country. So there are certain political reasons that have created this divide, this confusion in the country. They deliberately sought to project the RSS thought process as something exclusive and something anti-minority or whatever. But one just small, rider I will just add. This whole idea of this country as a very great Catholic, very inclusive civilization and all. This is a very old idea, we all know, we all agree with that. But when it faced with certain ideas which are very exclusive, very supremacist, when it encountered those ideas, say 1500 years ago, 1200 years ago, when it came face to face with certain very fundamentalist, very exclusive, very supremacist ideas. How to deal with those ideas? Their conflict arose. Their frictions arose. Those fault lines continue to this day. So when you talk about those fault lines, you must understand, you cannot say only Hindus are at fault. Both sides have to reconcile to this great idea of this land, that we are all one. Nobody can claim supremacy in this country. As it is very well pointed out, here even Vedas were challenged. Bhagavan Buddha for decades went from village to village propagating against the Vedic traditions of this country. But did we say that Buddha was an enemy of this country? No. So that is the tradition. But this Catholicity must be appreciated by everybody. So nobody can expect this Catholicity to be one-way traffic. It has to be a two-way traffic. That sense has to be injected into everybody. Nobody should become exclusive. And probably you mentioned it. You should not create a Semitized version of Hinduism. A Semitic Hinduism you cannot create. If you try to create, it can be something, but cannot be Hinduism. Because it cannot fit. It doesn't fit into that. So I think the propaganda about RSS is misplaced. We have always held this view that when we talk about Hindu, we're talking about today's 1.4 million, or that time in 1940s or 50s, 35 lakhs or whatever, 35 crores or whatever population we had at that time.
Mr. Jayapanda, fine, one understands that the Sangh has a different outlook and they're not in the business of everyday politics. The BJP is, and you're in the business of winning elections. And in the pursuit of that, sometimes lines are crossed. There are things that are said by some of your own party members which are not things that should be actually repeated in societies that make perhaps the other side, minorities, etc., upset. I think that's really what Mr. Verma was talking about, that we can't cross certain lines. In trying to reclaim our past, we can't overdo things. Sometimes there's a tendency. Where does this come from? And how does one address it? If you do agree with me, that is.
The fact is, in a democracy as large and diverse as this, every section of the political spectrum has people who cross certain lines. These sort of questions ought to also have been asked 10 years and more ago, when people owing allegiance to hardcore leftist revolutionary movements who were expressly, avowedly trying to overthrow the state, and not just expressing their free speech, but helping to facilitate arms movements. They were given a role in government. They were given a role to oversee the constitutionally elected government by way of overseeing the cabinet. Now, the reality is that there will be extreme viewpoints at any point in the spectrum. How do you deal with that? The BJP makes it very clear that it doesn't tolerate any kind of extremist position and has taken action to communicate this. We have suspended people from the party. We have removed people from the party. I myself, as as an office bearer, have had to take some actions like these. The fact that we govern on the slogan of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas and Sabka Prayas is not just a slogan, because every time I run into ill-informed foreign correspondents and academics who make allegations of discrimination, I ask them that this government has spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars on so many programs to deliver goods and benefits to hundreds of millions of Indians. like piped drinking water in everybody's home. It's gone from 16% to 72% on the way to 100%. I can give many examples. I ask them, show me one example of discrimination. Show me one. Not 1%. Show me one example where BJP-run governments have discriminated against somebody, an Indian citizen, based on religion. They can't, not one.
I just wanted to say, when you ask for one example, I can give you one example where this government has discriminated against the Hindus, but gives interest-free loans to Waqf board to set up shops.
No, I think the debate is not about the superiority of one religion or the other. But you will concede this, and as an observer who's not part now of any political party, but who has a point of view and is in politics, that there can be excesses in all religions. We condemn extremism of all kinds in all religion, which should include extremism which is given a long rope among a new breed of Hindu evangelists. I say this because I'm a proud Hindu. And by the way, as I have written, I just want to mention an anecdote that my book, it was on Ram Madhavji's book launch. I think Dattatreya Hosbole was there, the number 2 in the RSS. And before the function began, he told me that Pavanji, मैंने आपकी great Hindu civilization अक्षर पढ़ी है. Pavanji, I've read your great Hindu civilization verbatim. Then to my surprise, he named the page. Up to page 300 and something, no one could have put it better than you what perhaps the reasons for the rediscovery of Hinduism and the civilization associated with are. He says, but then you become critical. And I told him that I become critical because I am not blind. And therefore, then he said, इस बात पे हमको चर्चा करना चाहिए. And I appreciated that because we are a civilization which is based on sabya samvad, civilized discourse. I'm willing to have it with anybody. So, as far as the RSS is concerned, it's a nationalist organization. I mean to say that Veer Savarkar was a coward. These kind of criticisms don't add value to the critique of extreme Hindu right. No. Veer Savarkar was a patriot, and incidentally, apart from his short polemic on the Hindu Rashtra, he wrote much more about the need for social reform within Hinduism, as he called them the 7 fetters. And perhaps he was more outspoken than even Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar on the need for reform within Hinduism. He had the courage to do so, and he had also the license to do so as a Hindu. The RSS, incidentally, people don't know, a RSS contingent was invited by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1963 for the Republic Day parade in Delhi because of their contribution in helping the government during the 1962 war. They did that in 65. They did that in 71. So, Veer Savarkar himself, incidentally, after Hindu Rashtra, has written other texts where he is not so exclusionist. But today it seems that, I'm surprised, and Madhavji, correct me, those who are responsibly trying to push for the reclamation of Indian culture seem to have lost the reins to people who, if locked in a room, can't write 1.5 pages on Hindu civilization or Hinduism. And you have referred to it, Rahul, in your book, which I'm referring to a particular organization in the larger Sangh Parivar, which is the fastest growing organization. And therefore, when Mohan Bhagwat, as a responsible leader of a cultural and civilizational think tank, visits a mosque, a masjid, and meets with 5 intellectuals. Surprisingly, he is trolled by supporters of the BJP for having betrayed the BJP. This is a new development where the control of a very laudable project is fast moving to people who say we don't need the RSS and the BJP, we know what to do. We can take the law into our own hands. And therefore, while this is not for a moment to condone any extremism in any other religion, this is something which we together as Hindus in this project of the battle for Bharat must bear in mind.
No, I would only say that what we are calling as trolling because of the social media influence today has been an integral part of our civilizational journey. When we talked about Charvaka, what was Charvaka doing? He was so strongly criticizing the Vedas that probably we don't use such strong language today. What was Buddha doing? I mean, if you read Buddha's discourses about Sanatana religion, probably we can't repeat so many things. What Ambedkar wrote about certain aspects of this religion. So we never call them trolls. Today it's happening because there is something called social media platform, and most importantly the point that Pawanji said, I fully agree, that those who probably cannot write, he talked about 1.5 pages, they cannot write the troll also without mistakes. That tweet or what you call it nowadays, I don't know, X, that is happening. But I would only make, I indirectly hinted at it, when we come face to face with a particular thought process which is very exclusive, very aggressive, very supremacist, how do you deal with it? I give you one example today. In Telangana Assembly, one MLA is sitting as the pro tem speaker. He is known for his vitriol. He was the one who said, remove your police for, 1 day or, a few hours and allow us. We will show what Hindus will be, what cowards Hindus will be, we will show to them. This is the guy. He was arrested for that. He was in jail for 3-4 months for the statement. Hate speech. No, he is sitting as pro tem speaker. Now, 7 BJP MLAs decided that he may be a 3-time MLA, but he cannot be the pro tem speaker. We will take oath under the full speaker. Now, we have great intellectuals in our TV studios who are saying that this is very, Hindu communalism coming in BJP. They are very, anti this. You have that kind of situation that creates its response. But that response is not necessarily what, is the real real ideology or real thought process. Real thought process is what Mohan Bhagwat stands for, or what the RSS as an organization stands for. But yes, the current discourse where we are coming across certain very extreme views is well known. In a very casual way also, not criticizing Anand. Anand is a very wonderful speaker and he has lots of supporters and all, but he suddenly used the word anti-national for Modi. We are very freely, liberally giving this tag to others nowadays. Now Modi's turn bhi aa gaya, formulas, anti-national act was withdrawing formula. Not in the intention that Modi is anti-national, but sometimes in that flow we are using certain words that is causing lot of what you call disharmony and discomfort in the debate. Yeah, I fully appreciate that, but RSS is RSS. What Pawanji understood as RSS is RSS.
Final question to Smita Prakash. Just wanted to ask you, because I think that's one part that we never really come to. This whole business of attributing labels now.
Yeah.
And it is an endemic part, it seems, also of the media discourse.
Yeah.
So why is this happening?
So I'm going to quote from your book in which you've given the names Andhbhakt, Godsevadi, Hindutvavadi, Sangi, Musangi. So at any point of time, we've been called these, and before that, we were called other names. So trolling doesn't really bother. This kind of labeling doesn't bother, and it's going to get more and more aggressive, this kind of labeling, as we get closer to 2024. And the fissures that we've all discussed out here, that's going to, I think, widen. We've already seen the Sanatan fissure, which is, calling it, they're mosquitoes, they need to be eliminated, Hinduism needs, all kinds of things which have been said. I don't want to repeat it, but it's going, and now the latest one, the North-South divide, it really, really upsets me. There are many who say that what is the need to get so upset about it? But no, these are things which one heard in the 70s. You know, my family moved out of Bombay at one point of time because they were called lungis, right? South Indians were called that. To think that my generation now has to listen to that after the 70s, have to listen to it now, and it's going to come up more and more in, you know, as we get closer to the elections, and to keep your sanity and to keep a balance is very important, and it's going to happen again.
Thank you everyone for being here.